"I've never been kissed," she whispered. The cowboy took off his hat and said, "Then start slow." Emily Harper had always been the kind of person people described as nice. Not exciting, not bold, just nice. In the small town of Willow Creek, Montana, being nice was enough to earn you polite smiles at the grocery store and warm greetings at church on Sundays. But it was not enough to make your life feel full. At 27, Emily worked at the town's only library, a brick building that sat across from the post office and next to a bakery that smelled like fresh bread every morning. Her days followed the same pattern. She unlocked the doors at 9, she turned on the lights one row at a time. She ran her fingers along the wooden desk her grandfather had once helped repair years ago. The library was quiet, and she liked that. Quiet places made her feel safe. She organized returned books with careful hands. She recommended novels to older women who liked love stories with happy endings. She helped children find adventure books about faraway lands. Sometimes she would sit at the front desk and watch the dust float in the sunlight coming through the tall windows. It was peaceful, predictable, calm. But when the clock struck 5 and she locked the doors again, the quiet felt different. It followed her home. Emily lived in a small white house at the edge of town. It had a porch swing that creaked gently when the wind moved it. The paint was slightly chipped near the steps. The house had belonged to her parents. After her mother passed away 3 years ago, Emily stayed. She told everyone it was because she loved the memories there. That was true. But it was also because she didn't know where else to go. Growing up, Emily had not been like the other girls in school. While they talked about crushes and school dances, she rushed home every afternoon. Her mother had been sick for a long time. There were medicines to organize, meals to cook, appointments to remember. Emily never complained. She loved her mother deeply. Taking care of her felt natural. Still, sometimes at night, she would hear laughter from down the street. Teenagers walking home from a game, music drifting from someone's backyard. She would pause at the window for a moment, watching life move forward without her. By the time her classmates were going to prom, Emily was sitting beside a hospital bed, reading softly from a book her mother liked. When her classmates left town for college adventures, Emily enrolled in the local community college so she could stay close to home. She told herself she would have time later. Later came faster than she expected. After her mother passed, the house became very quiet, too quiet. The first night alone, Emily sat at the kitchen table long after midnight, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. She had spent so many years caring for someone else that she didn't quite know how to care for herself. People in town were kind. They brought casseroles. They hugged her at church. They said, "You're so strong." She smiled and thanked them. But strength can feel lonely. Years passed gently, not in big dramatic waves. Just small, steady days that blended together. Emily built a life that was simple and safe. She planted flowers in the front yard every spring. She baked banana bread on Sundays. She attended town meetings when she remembered. And yet, there was one truth she carried quietly in her heart. She had never been kissed. At first, it didn't seem important. In high school, she told herself she was too busy. In college, she said she would wait for the right person. After her mother's illness became serious, romance felt small compared to hospital visits and medical bills. But now, at 27, the realization felt heavier. She noticed it during small moments. When a couple held hands in the library while choosing books. When someone returned a novel and said, "My husband loved this one." When she watched romantic scenes in movies and felt a strange mix of curiosity and distance. What would it feel like? Would it be awkward? Sweet? Quick? Meaningful? She didn't know, and she was too embarrassed to ask. In a town as small as Willow Creek, everyone seemed to know everyone's history. Most of the people her age were married or engaged. Some already had children starting kindergarten. At gatherings, conversations often circled around home renovations, anniversaries, or parenting stories. Emily listened politely. She smiled at the right moments, but she never shared much about her own life, because there wasn't much to tell. Sometimes she wondered if something was wrong with her. She wasn't unattractive. She had soft brown hair that fell just past her shoulders and gentle features that made her look younger than her age. But she had always been quiet, careful. What if someone found her inexperienced strange? What if they laughed? So she avoided the risk entirely. One afternoon, while reorganizing the fiction section, her friend Clara from the bakery stopped by. Clara was lively and talkative, with flour often dusted on her apron. "Are you coming to the Harper Ranch barn dance next Friday?" Clara asked, leaning against a bookshelf. Emily hesitated. "I don't know. I'm not much of a dancer." "You don't have to dance?" Clara insisted. "It's just music, food, people talking." You've barely gone anywhere this year." Emily gave a small shrug. "I've been busy." "Busy shelving books?" They both laughed, but Clara's eyes were gentle. "It might be good for you," she added softly, "just to get out." That evening, Emily sat on her porch swing, thinking about the invitation. The Harper Ranch hosted the biggest fall event in town every year. String lights hung across the wooden beams of the barn. Families brought homemade pies. A local band played country songs that everyone seemed to know. She had not attended in years. The idea made her nervous. Crowds made her feel small. Conversations with strangers felt like tests she might fail. But another thought quietly pushed its way in. What if she kept waiting for later, and later never came? The wind moved gently through the trees. The sky turned shades of pink and gold as the sun set behind the hills. Emily hugged her cardigan closer around her shoulders. Maybe it was time to try something different. Not something dramatic. Just one evening. The week passed slowly. Every day at the library felt slightly charged with anticipation. She caught herself staring at her reflection in the restroom mirror, wondering if she looked grown up enough, confident enough. On Friday afternoon, she left work early to get ready. She stood in front of her closet for nearly 20 minutes. Most of her clothes were practical. Soft sweaters, long skirts, comfortable flats. Nothing felt right for a barn dance. Finally, she chose a simple blue dress she had worn only once before, paired with low boots. She brushed her hair carefully and added a touch of lip gloss. It felt unfamiliar, like she was preparing for a version of herself she hadn't met yet. When she stepped outside, the air was crisp and cool. The sky was already darkening. In the distance, she could hear faint music drifting from the direction of the ranch. Her heart began to beat faster. She almost turned back twice while driving. She told herself she could still make an excuse. A headache, a long week. No one would blame her. But something steadier inside her whispered, "Go." When she finally parked near the barn, the sight took her breath away. Warm yellow lights glowed against the wooden walls. Laughter spilled into the night air. The smell of grilled food mixed with autumn leaves. For a moment, she stayed in her car, hands resting on the steering wheel. This was unfamiliar territory. This was risk. She took a slow breath and stepped out. As she walked toward the barn doors, she felt both invisible and exposed at the same time. Groups of people stood chatting comfortably. Couples swayed to the music inside. Children ran past her, giggling. Emily paused near the entrance, smoothing her dress nervously. She didn't know it yet, but this simple decision, to show up, was the first step toward a life she had quietly wished for, but never believed would truly be hers. And somewhere inside that warmly lit barn, someone had already noticed the shy woman standing near the doorway, gathering courage she didn't even realize she had. The music inside the barn was louder than Emily expected. A fiddle carried the main tune while a guitar followed in steady rhythm. Boots tapped against the wooden floor, and laughter rose and fell like waves. The air smelled of hay, fresh pie, and the cool night drifting in through the open doors. Emily stood near the entrance for a moment, letting her eyes adjust to the warm string lights hanging from the ceiling beams. People filled the space in small circles. Some were dancing confidently in the center. Others leaned against the walls, talking and smiling. She told herself she would just stay for 30 minutes. That felt safe. She moved toward a long table near the side wall and poured herself a cup of lemonade. The glass felt cold in her hand. It gave her something to hold, something to focus on. She watched the dancers carefully, trying to understand the rhythm of the steps. Everyone else seemed to know exactly when to spin or clap. She felt slightly outside of it all, like someone watching a movie instead of living inside it. "Emily?" Mrs. Patterson, one of the library's regular visitors, waved cheerfully. "I'm so glad you came." Emily smiled politely. "I thought I'd try something different," Patterson said before being pulled away by her husband for the next song. Emily was alone again. She took a sip of lemonade and let her eyes wander across the room. That was when she noticed him. He stood near one of the large wooden support beams, hat low over his forehead, arms loosely crossed. He wasn't dancing either. His boots were dusty, like he had come straight from work. His dark denim shirt was rolled at the sleeves. He looked comfortable in the noise, not restless, just quietly observing. She quickly looked away when she realized she had been staring. But a few seconds later she felt it again, that strange awareness of being noticed. When she glanced back up, his eyes were still on her. Not in a bold way. Not in a way that made her uncomfortable. Just curious. Her stomach fluttered unexpectedly. She looked down at her cup and pretended to study the condensation forming on the glass. Across the barn, Jack Callahan had not planned on staying long either. He'd returned to Willow Creek only 2 months earlier, after nearly 10 years working on ranches in different parts of the state. His father's knee injury had made it harder to manage the Harper Ranch alone, so Jack came back without much discussion. Family came first. The town hadn't changed much. The same storefronts, the same familiar faces, the same stories told over and over again. He had greeted dozens of people that night already. Handshakes, backslaps, questions about where he'd been. But when he saw her standing quietly near the wall, something caught his attention. She wasn't trying to be the center of the room. She wasn't scanning for attention. She looked like she was deciding whether she belonged there at all. He recognized that feeling. Jack pushed away from the beam and adjusted his hat. He told himself he was just being polite, just introducing himself. Still, as he crossed the floor, he felt a small flicker of something unfamiliar, anticipation. Emily sensed him before she saw him, boots stopping a few feet away, a shadow falling gently across the wooden floor near her shoes. "Evening," he said, voice calm and steady. She looked up slowly. Up close, his eyes were a soft shade of gray-blue, clear and direct. There was no teasing smile, no careless grin, just openness. "Hi," she replied, hoping her voice didn't sound as nervous as she felt. "I don't think we've met properly," he continued. "Jack Callahan." He held out his hand. She hesitated for half a second before placing her hand in his. His handshake was warm and firm but not overpowering. "Emily Harper," she said. His eyebrows lifted slightly. "Harper? From the library?" She blinked in surprise. "Yes. My dad practically lives in that place during winter," he said with a small smile. "Says you always help him find those history books he likes." Relief softened her shoulders. "I try my best." "You planning on joining them?" She let out a quiet laugh. "I don't really dance. Most folks out there don't either. They just look confident." She smiled despite herself. The conversation didn't feel forced. That surprised her most. Usually when men tried to talk to her, rare as that was, she felt pressure to respond perfectly. But Jack asked simple questions. "How long have you worked at the library? Do you enjoy it? What kind of books do you read when no one's watching?" She answered slowly at first, then more comfortably. She told him she liked stories about ordinary people finding unexpected courage. She admitted she sometimes read travel books even though she had barely left Montana. He listened closely, not glancing over her shoulder, not distracted. When she finished speaking, he didn't rush to change the subject. He thought about her words before responding. "That sounds like someone who wants adventure," he said gently. She shook her head quickly. "Oh, I don't know about that. Maybe not loud adventure," he added, "but something different." The way he said it made her feel seen in a way she hadn't expected. A faster song began playing and couples rushed back to the center of the floor. Someone bumped lightly into Jack's shoulder as they passed, apologizing quickly. He stepped slightly closer to Emily to give them room, but he kept a respectful distance. "You sure you don't want to try one song?" he asked. Her heart skipped. She imagined herself tripping, missing a step, embarrassing herself in front of half the town. "I wouldn't know what to do," she admitted honestly. He tilted his head thoughtfully. "That makes 2 of us." She laughed again, more freely this time. He extended his hand, not demanding, not dramatic. "Just open." "One song," he repeated. "No pressure. If it's terrible, we can both pretend it never happened." Her mind raced with reasons to say no, but something stronger pushed forward. She was tired of standing at the edge of rooms. She placed her cup down on the table and took his hand. The dance floor felt larger than it had from the sidelines. The wooden boards creaked under their steps. The music seemed louder, closer. Jack positioned himself carefully, leaving space between them. "Just follow my lead," he said softly. "And if I mess up, I'll take the blame." The first few steps were awkward. She nearly stepped on his boot. He turned slightly too early. But instead of laughing at her, he smiled reassuringly. "See?" he said. "We're already professionals." Gradually, her body relaxed. She let herself focus on the rhythm instead of the watching crowd. His hand was steady at her side, guiding without pulling. For the first time that night, she forgot to be self-conscious. The song ended sooner than she expected. Applause filled the barn as the band paused briefly. Emily stepped back, breath slightly uneven. Not from exhaustion, but from the rush of doing something she had avoided for years. "You survived," Jack said lightly. "So did you," she replied. They moved back toward the edge of the floor, but this time she didn't feel like hiding. People smiled at them as they passed. Clara caught her eye from across the room and gave her an exaggerated thumbs up. Emily felt her cheeks warm, Jack leaned casually against the wall beside her. "I'm glad you came tonight." The words were simple, but they felt important. "I almost didn't," she admitted. "What changed your mind?" She considered the question carefully. "I think I was tired of waiting for later." He studied her face for a moment as if weighing that answer. "Later's not guaranteed," he said quietly. "Sometimes you just have to show up." The band began another slow tune. This time, neither of them rushed to the dance floor. They stood side by side, listening. Outside the barn doors, the night sky stretched wide and clear, dotted with stars. A cool breeze slipped through the open space, brushing lightly against her arms. For the first time in a long while, Emily didn't feel invisible. She didn't feel like the girl who stayed home. She felt like someone standing at the beginning of something she didn't fully understand yet. And as Jack adjusted his hat and glanced at her with that same calm curiosity, she sensed, without knowing why, that this night would not be like all the others before it. It was the start of a conversation that neither of them had planned, and neither of them were in a hurry to end. The way Jack had asked her to dance without making it a big deal, the way he listened when she spoke, the way he didn't try to impress her with loud stories or bold jokes. He had simply stood beside her, steady and patient. On Monday morning, she told herself, it had just been a nice evening, nothing more. But on Wednesday afternoon, the bell above the library door rang, and when she looked up from the front desk, there he was. Jack stepped inside, removing his hat politely as he walked in. He glanced around as if he hadn't been there in years, though she knew he had visited once or twice with his father. "Afternoon," he said. Her heart jumped before she could stop it. "Hi." He approached the desk slowly, hands resting on the wooden surface. "I was wondering if you could help me find something." She nodded, trying to keep her voice calm. "What are you looking for?" He hesitated for a second. "Something about cattle management in cold weather?" She blinked. "That's specific." He smiled slightly. "Figured you'd know where to look." Within minutes, she was guiding him through the nonfiction section. She reached up to pull a book from the top shelf. He stepped closer, as if ready to catch it if she dropped it. The simple gesture made her aware of how near he was, but not in an uncomfortable way. "Here," she said, handing him the book. "Thank you," he replied, but he didn't leave right away. Instead, he glanced around the quiet rows of shelves. "It's peaceful in here. That's what I like about it." He nodded. "I can see that." They stood there for a moment, surrounded by books and afternoon sunlight. She wondered if he would say something else, ask something else. Instead, he cleared his throat lightly. "I'll let you get back to work. See you around, Emily." The way he said her name made her chest feel warm. He came back 2 days later. This time he returned the cattle book and asked for a novel recommendation. "You read those love stories, don't you?" he asked. She felt her cheeks warm. Sometimes." "Pick one for me," he said. "Surprise me." She studied him for a moment, trying to guess what kind of story would suit a quiet rancher. She finally handed him a book about two strangers rebuilding their lives in a small town after difficult years. He read the back cover carefully. "Sounds hopeful." "It is," she said. He looked at her thoughtfully. "Good." Over the next few weeks, Jack found reasons to stop by the library at least twice a week. Sometimes he brought coffee from the diner down the street. Sometimes he simply asked how her day was going. The townspeople began to notice. Clara leaned across the library desk one afternoon, lowering her voice dramatically. "He keeps coming in here." Emily pretended to rearrange papers. "He likes books." Clara gave her a knowing look. "Sure he does." Emily tried not to let herself think too far ahead. She had never been in this position before. She didn't know the unspoken rules of dating. She didn't know when it was normal to expect something more. But she did know that she looked forward to seeing him. One evening as the sun began to set, Jack lingered longer than usual. The last visitor left, and the library fell quiet. Emily locked the front door and turned the sign to closed. When she stepped outside, she saw him leaning against his truck in the parking lot. "Waiting for someone?" she asked gently. "Yeah," he replied. "You." Her pulse quickened. "I thought I'd walk you to your car," he added casually. "It's right there," she said, pointing a few steps away. He smiled. "It still counts." They walked slowly across the parking lot. The sky was painted in soft shades of orange and purple. Crickets chirped in the grass nearby. He leaned lightly against her car door as she unlocked it, but didn't open it yet. "I've been meaning to ask you something," he said. Our stomach tightened. "I'd like to take you to dinner this weekend." "Nothing fancy. Just the diner or maybe the cafe outside town." The words felt big. even though he said them gently. Dinner. A real date. She swallowed hard. Her mind raced. What did people talk about on dates? What if she said something wrong? What if he expected more than she was ready to give? Her heart was pounding so loudly she thought he might hear it. There was something else pressing against her chest, something she had never said out loud before. Before she could stop herself, the word slipped out. I've never been kissed. As soon as she said it, she wished she could take it back. Why did she say that? He hadn't even mentioned anything about a kiss. Why had her mind jumped there? The world seemed to go very still. The crickets. The wind. The distant sound of a truck passing on the highway. She braced herself for surprise, for confusion, maybe even a polite step backward. Instead, Jack slowly removed his hat. It was such a simple movement, but it felt meaningful, respectful. He ran a hand lightly through his hair and looked at her, not with shock, not with amusement, just steady attention. Okay, he said quietly. She blinked. Okay? Yeah. She stared at him, unsure what he meant. He stepped a little closer, but not enough to make her feel crowded. There was still space between them. Choice. Then, start slow, he said softly. The tension in her chest loosened just a little. You're not in a race, he continued. You don't owe anyone a timeline. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear that. I just thought you should know, she admitted. I don't have much experience. He gave a small shrug. Everyone starts somewhere. There was none. I don't want you to feel pressured, he added. Dinner is dinner. That's it. We can take everything one step at a time. One step at a time. The phrase echoed in her mind. For years she had felt behind everyone else. Like she had missed important lessons everyone else had already learned. But the way he spoke made it sound simple. Not dramatic. Not embarrassing. Just new. She felt her shoulders relax. Dinner sounds nice, she said finally. A slow smile spread across his face. Not triumphant, not overly excited. Just warm. Saturday at 7? He asked. She nodded. He placed his hat back on his head. I'll pick you up. As he stepped away, she felt a strange mix of relief and anticipation. When she finally got into her car, her hands were shaking slightly. She rested them on the steering wheel and let out a long breath. She had told someone her secret, and the world hadn't fallen apart. Instead, it felt like something had quietly shifted. At night, she stood in front of her bathroom mirror, brushing her hair slowly. She studied her reflection with new curiosity. Maybe being inexperienced didn't mean being unworthy. Maybe it simply meant her story was unfolding differently. Across town, Jack sat on his porch, replaying the conversation in his own mind. He respected her honesty. It took courage to say something like that. He didn't see her as naive or behind. He saw someone who had spent years caring for others and was only now allowing herself space to grow. He knew one thing clearly. He would not rush her. Saturday felt both close and far away. For Emily, each day leading up to it carried a new kind of nervous excitement. She wasn't afraid of being laughed at anymore. She was afraid of hoping too much. But when she remembered the calm way he had said, "Then start slow," her fear softened. For the first time, the future didn't feel like something she had missed. It felt like something she was finally stepping into, carefully, gently, at her own pace. Saturday evening arrived with a quiet kind of excitement that Emily had never felt before. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was soft and steady, like the feeling before the first page of a new book. She spent most of the afternoon cleaning her already clean house. She wiped the kitchen counter twice. She adjusted the cushions on the couch. She watered the small plants near the window even though they didn't need it. Keeping her hands busy helped calm her thoughts. At 6:30, she stood in front of her closet again. This time, the choice felt different. It wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about feeling comfortable in her own skin. She chose a simple cream-colored sweater and a long skirt that moved gently when she walked. She left her hair down but tucked one side behind her ear. When headlights swept across her front window at exactly 7, her heart jumped. He was on time. She stepped outside before she could overthink it. The evening air was cool, carrying the scent of pine trees and distant wood smoke. Jack stood beside his truck, dressed neatly but still unmistakably himself. Clean boots, pressed shirt, hat in his hands instead of on his head. "You look nice," he said simply. She smiled. "Thank you. So do you." There was no awkward silence. Just a quiet understanding as he opened the passenger door for her. The small gesture made her feel valued, not rushed. They drove to a small cafe just outside town. It wasn't fancy, just warm and welcoming. Soft yellow lights glowed through the windows. A chalkboard near the door listed homemade soups and fresh pie. Inside, they chose a booth near the window. For a moment, Emily felt the familiar flutter of nervousness. What if she ran out of things to say? What if she said too much? But Jack made it easy. He asked about her favorite childhood memory. She told him about building blanket forts in the living room while her mother read stories aloud. He shared stories about learning to ride horses with his older cousins. They laughed at small mistakes they had made growing up. The conversation didn't feel like an interview. It felt like two people slowly discovering each other's pages. When their food arrived, they talked between bites. At one point, she caught him watching her with a thoughtful expression. "What?" she asked softly. "You don't rush your words," he said. "I like that." She blinked. "Most people say I talk too little." "Maybe they don't listen enough," he replied. The sentence stayed with her long after the plates were cleared. After dinner, instead of heading straight home, he asked, "Would you like to take a short drive? There's a spot by the river that's quiet this time of night." She hesitated only briefly before nodding. The drive was peaceful. The sky was clear, scattered with stars. When they reached the river, he parked near a wide-open field where tall grass moved gently in the breeze. They stepped out of the truck. The sound of water flowing over rocks filled the quiet space between them. Emily wrapped her sweater a little tighter around herself. Jack noticed and, without making a big gesture, moved slightly closer, not touching, just near enough to share warmth. "It's nice out here," she said. "It is," he agreed. "Helps clear the mind." Their shoulders brushed once by accident, and she felt a spark of awareness. Not fear, just recognition. He didn't comment on it. He didn't turn it into something bigger than it was. After a while, they stopped near a large flat rock. The moonlight reflected softly on the river's surface. Everything felt calm. "I meant what I said the other night," he said gently. She looked at him. "About starting slow?" He nodded. "I don't want you to feel like you have to catch up to anyone. There's no schedule." "I'm not used to this," she admitted. "Letting someone get close." "That's okay," he replied. "We can learn as we go." The word learn made her smile. It felt familiar, like the shelves of the library where everything had its place and could be understood step by step. They stood there quietly for a few moments. She could hear her own heartbeat, steady but strong. He shifted slightly, turning toward her. "Can I ask you something? Is it all right if I hold your hand?" It was such a simple question, yet no one had ever asked her that before. She felt warmth spread through her chest. "Yes," she said softly. He reached for her hand slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. She didn't. His hand was warm and steady. Not tight, not demanding, just present. She looked down at their hands for a second, amazed at how something so small could feel so important. They stayed like that for several minutes, listening to the river. On the drive back to her house, the silence wasn't heavy. It felt peaceful. When they pulled into her driveway, her nerves returned, but softer this time. She knew this moment might come. The space between goodbye and goodnight. He walked her to the porch. The porch swing creaked gently in the breeze. "I had a good time," he said. "So did I," she replied honestly. They stood facing each other. The air felt charged but calm at the same time. He didn't lean in immediately. He didn't assume. Instead, he asked quietly, "Is it all right if I stand a little closer?" Her breath caught, but she nodded. He stepped forward carefully, close enough that she could see the tiny scar near his eyebrow, close enough to feel the warmth from his shoulders. Her heart was racing now, but not from fear, from trust. He lifted his hand slowly, brushing a loose strand of hair away from her face. His fingers barely touched her skin, but the gesture made her eyes close for a second. "Tell me if you want me to stop," he said softly. The kindness in his voice steadied her. She opened her eyes and looked at him fully. "I don't want you to stop," she whispered. He leaned in just slightly, giving her time. Their first almost kiss paused in the space between them. She could feel his breath. She could hear her own heartbeat. But instead of rushing, he rested his forehead lightly against hers. And that was it. No dramatic moment, no pressure. Just closeness. She felt tears gather unexpectedly in her eyes, not from sadness, but from relief. For years, she had imagined this moment with fear. But standing there, she felt safe. After a few seconds, he stepped back gently. "We can take the rest slow, too," he said with a small smile. She laughed softly, brushing at her eyes. "I'd like that." They met for coffee during her lunch breaks. He invited her to watch the sunset from the hill behind his ranch. She showed him her favorite reading corner in the library after hours. Each time he reached for her hand, he asked first. Each time he leaned closer, he watched her eyes for permission. She began to understand something important. Being close to someone wasn't about experience. It was about trust and patience. One Sunday afternoon, weeks later, they returned to the river. The air was warmer now, the grass taller. They sat side by side on the same flat rock as before. He looked at her with that same steady expression. "Are you ready?" he asked quietly. She knew what he meant. This time, her heart didn't race with fear. It raced with certainty. "Yes," she said. He leaned in slowly, giving her space to change her mind. She didn't. Their first kiss was soft and brief, gentle and unhurried. It wasn't perfect. They both smiled a little afterwards, slightly shy, but it felt right. When they pulled back, she let out a small breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "See?" he said softly. "Slow works." She smiled through shining eyes. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel behind anyone else. She felt exactly where she was meant to be. By the time a full year had passed since the night of the barn dance, Emily sometimes had to pause and remind herself how much had changed. Not the town. Willow Creek was still the same. The bakery still opened before sunrise. The library still smelled like paper and polished wood. The same trucks still lined Main Street every morning. But Emily had changed. It showed in small ways first. She laughed louder now. Not in a way that drew attention, but in a way that sounded free. She no longer stood at the edge of rooms during gatherings. She joined conversations instead of waiting to be invited into them. At the library, she recommended books with more confidence, sometimes even teasing regular visitors about their predictable choices. People noticed. Clara mentioned it one afternoon while placing a fresh box of pastries on the library desk. "You glow differently," she said with a grin. Emily rolled her eyes playfully. "I do not." "You do," Claire insisted. "It's like you finally stepped into your own story." That sentence stayed with her long after Clara left. Jack never tried to change her. That was the quiet beauty of their relationship. He didn't push her into crowds or pressure her into becoming someone louder or bolder than she was. Instead, he simply stood beside her as she grew into herself. Their relationship continued the same way it had started, steady and patient. They built routines together. Friday evenings were often spent cooking dinner at her house. He would chop vegetables while she stirred a pot on the stove. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they worked in comfortable silence. Afterward, they would sit on the porch swing, watching the sky fade from blue to dark gray. On Sundays, she often visited the ranch. She liked watching him work, even if she didn't understand everything about cattle or fences. He explained things simply, never making her feel out of place. Once he placed a worn pair of gloves in her hands and showed her how to mend a small section of fencing. She laughed when she did it wrong the first time. "See," he said, "learning." The word had become part of them. They had disagreements, too. Small ones. About whether to adopt the stray dog that kept wandering near her porch, about how much sugar belonged in cornbread. But even in those moments, they talked through things calmly. For Emily, the biggest change was internal. She no longer thought of herself as someone who had missed her chance. She stopped measuring her life against invisible timelines. Instead of wondering what she hadn't done, she focused on what she was building now. One autumn evening, almost exactly a year after their first dance, the Harper Ranch hosted another barn gathering. The same string lights hung from the beams, the same wooden floor echoed with music and boots. This time Emily didn't hesitate outside. She walked in beside Jack, her hand resting comfortably in his. People greeted them with warm smiles. There were knowing looks, gentle nudges, whispered comments of about time. She didn't blush and hide anymore. When the music started, Jack looked down at her with a familiar smile. Dance? She didn't need to think about it. Yes. They moved to the center of the floor. The rhythm felt natural now. She didn't watch her feet. She didn't worry about who might be looking. She simply followed the music and trusted the steady hand guiding her. At one point, she caught her reflection in a window near the wall. She almost didn't recognize the woman smiling back at her. Not because she looked different on the outside, but because she looked sure. Halfway through the evening, the band slowed the music. The lights seemed warmer, softer. Conversations quieted slightly as couples swayed closer together. Jack led her gently toward the center of the barn again, but this time there was something different in his expression. She noticed the way he took a deeper breath, the way his hand squeezed hers just a little tighter. The music faded. Instead of stepping back, he turned to face her fully. For a second, the room seemed to shrink. The laughter, the voices, the movement, all softened into the background. He removed his hat slowly, just like he had the night she told him her secret. A small murmur moved through the crowd as he lowered himself onto one knee. Emily's breath caught. She felt the same rush of nerves she had felt a year ago, but this time, it wasn't fear of the unknown. It was awe at how far she had come. He looked up at her with steady eyes. "I'm grateful you showed up that night," he said clearly enough for her to hear, even over the quiet hum of the room. "And I'm grateful you trusted me to go slow." Her eyes filled with tears before he even continued. "You've taught me that patience isn't weakness, it's strength. And I don't want to build a life with anyone else." He reached into his jacket pocket and held out a small ring. Simple, elegant, honest. "Emily Harper, will you marry me?" She looked around the barn, the same barn where she once stood near the wall, unsure if she belonged. The same place where she first laughed with him. Now she stood at the center. She looked back at him, still kneeling, still waiting without pressure. "Yes," she said, her voice steady, despite the tears. "Yes." The barn erupted in applause and cheers. Claire wiped her eyes dramatically. Mrs. Patterson clapped her hands together with delight. He didn't pull her into a dramatic embrace. Instead, he rested his forehead gently against hers, just like that first almost kiss on her porch. "Slow worked," he whispered. She laughed softly. It did. Their wedding took place in the spring, beneath a wide-open sky near the river where they had shared their first real kiss. Wildflowers lined the edge of the field. White chairs faced a simple wooden arch decorated with greenery. It wasn't extravagant. It didn't need to be. When Emily walked down the aisle, she felt calm, not because everything was perfect, but because everything was honest. She saw him waiting at the front, hat in hand again. The same respectful gesture that had marked the most important moments of their story. As they exchanged vows, she thought about the girl she used to be. The one who stood at windows watching life pass by. The one who believed she was behind. She wished she could reach back in time and tell that version of herself something simple. You are not late. You were just on your own path. When the ceremony ended and the guests began to celebrate, Jack leaned close and kissed her gently. Familiar now. Warm. Certain. Later that evening, as the sun set over the river, they stood together watching the sky change colors. "You know," he said quietly, "I'm glad you told me." "Told you what?" she asked. "That you'd never been kissed." She smiled thoughtfully. "I was terrified." "I know," he said. "But it was the most honest thing you could have said." She slipped her hand into his. Their story wasn't loud or dramatic. It wasn't rushed or filled with grand gestures every day. It was built from small moments of trust. From listening, from asking instead of assuming, and that made it stronger. Years later, when people in town talked about their relationship, they didn't describe it as a whirlwind romance. They described it as steady, solid, kind. Emily no longer introduced herself as just the librarian. She was a wife, a partner, and still very much herself. Sometimes on quiet evenings, she would sit on the porch swing with Jack beside her, the same porch where she once stood, nervous and unsure. He would tip his hat back slightly and glance at her with that same calm smile, and she would remember the girl who whispered a secret under a fading sky. She would remember the man who answered not with surprise, not with pressure, but with patience. Then she would rest her head on his shoulder, grateful that her first kiss had not been rushed, not been forced by expectation, but given in its own perfect time. Because sometimes the most beautiful beginnings don't come from bold moves or dramatic moments. Sometimes they begin with a whisper, and someone kind enough to say, "Then start slow."